Good afternoon, everyone. This is a stakeholder meeting for the statutory alignment rulemaking for the Energy and Carbon Management Commission. This is docketed under 250600119. Today is July 7th, 2025. My name is Matthew Berman. I'm the hearing officer assigned to this docket. Um, at this time, I'm going to turn this matter over to Deputy Director Mercer Gelman.
Thank you, Matt, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope everyone had a good long weekend. I have shared my screen here. Like Hearing Officer Berman said, we are here for our stakeholder session on the statutory alignment rulemaking. And I'll start out with a brief agenda. We're going to talk through the rulemaking timeline and process, do an overview of the proposed rules, talk through next steps, and wrap up with a little bit of time, hopefully, for questions. I am joined here today by Jeremy Farron, ECMC Enforcement Manager, and Steve Kirschner, ECMC Enforcement Supervisor, as well as Sarah Rowlands, our Assistant Attorney General on this rulemaking. These folks have all contributed significantly to the draft rules in front of us, and we'll probably tag team this a bit to make sure we can answer everyone's questions. Jumping right into the process. Here is an updated timeline. The items in gray are the things that are behind us now and already complete. And what's in black is yet to come. So on June 9th, staff published the straw dog rules, and stakeholders had until June 20th to provide feedback, which staff then incorporated into the noticed rules and SBP that were put out on June 27th. The notice of hearing for the rulemaking provides that parties have until the end of the day this Friday, July 11th, to submit a request for party status, and the hearing will be on August 27th. Once we get all the requests for party status, Hearing Officer Berman will be putting out a hearing officer order that sets forth the briefing schedule. For anyone who may be unaware, there are two paths really to participate in this rulemaking and all ECMC rulemakings. Party status, what I was just speaking about, allows an individual or a group to submit pleadings, respond to other parties' pleadings, and present at the rulemaking hearing. So it would be to become a formal party to the rulemaking. There's also always public comment and the opportunity to participate in our rulemakings in a less formal capacity. This may be a better option for folks who want to be involved but don't have the time or the resources to take on the responsibilities of participating as a full party. We welcome both parties and public comments and hope that folks will engage in this rulemaking with us. I'd like to clarify our straw dog process, which, as I said in the first slide, is behind us, but some questions came up earlier, so I did just want to touch on them. The straw dog is ECMC's sort of informal first step that comes before the formal rulemaking process that we're now in. It's an extra layer of process where we put out an initial draft of the rules to start collecting feedback and make sure that the rules we notice are as good as they can be. We appreciate the feedback we got on the straw dog, and a lot of that has been incorporated into the noticed rules and SBP. Now I will move into a high-level overview of the noticed rules. Starting with EnviroScreen. In the 100 series, we updated the definition of EnviroScreen to incorporate the newest version of the tool, which is 2.0. I'd also like to draw your attention to the corresponding section of the SBP where we explain the important distinction between our defined term EnviroScreen and the defined term disproportionately impacted community. We've found and wanted to clarify that, or we've found that folks were conflating these two terms, and they are different. This isn't a new policy from ECMC, but we did want to take the opportunity to use the SBP to give a little more explanation. So here is the language in the SBP. I won't read it to you because you can read it for yourselves, but basically it clarifies that the term EnviroScreen, which is what we're updating this rulemaking, only appears in two ECMC rules. Those are 315B and 604B4. And those are provisions that require operators to supply ECMC with data from the CDPHE EnviroScreen tool. So those are the reports that you can generate for a specific location that show the different scores based on different demographic factors, impacts, and other things in that area. The rest of ECMC's rules regarding environmental justice hinge on whether a location is within a defined disproportionately impacted community, which is its own defined term. And in last year's cumulative impacts rulemaking, ECMC adopted the statutory definition of disproportionately impacted community. So that is the definition that we apply in determining whether something is in or out of a DI community. Right now, the best tool to use for that is the CDPHE disproportionately impacted community mapping tool. However, there will be a layer added to the COGIS map very soon. The next topic is the marginal well fee. Um, so this is a requirement that came out of Senate Bill 24229, which established the marginal well fee and authorized the orphan well mitigation enterprise to set that fee. So the orphan well mitigation enterprise has already set the fee. All this rule language does is provide a regulatory obligation to make it clear that operators are required to pay it. So again, we don't set the fee has already been set. This is just building it into our rules. That amount is $125 per well. Um, and the way the rule works is that it's per well, which is defined in the 100 series, which is a pretty broad definition of well. It's more than just an oil and gas production well. We did receive feedback from some stakeholders on the straw dog advocating for a narrower definition of well to only apply, for instance, to oil and gas production wells. We kept it this way in the notice draft for consistency with Rule 205C2. That's the rule that requires annual payment of an annual mitigation fee on every well. So we structured it this way for consistency. If folks continue to have concerns about that, I'm sure you will put it in your pre-hearing statements and we can continue looking at it. Next, we'll discuss enforcement, and I will hand it over to Jeremy Farron to walk us through this portion of the rules.
Thanks, Lauren. Good afternoon, everyone. Jeremy Farron, Enforcement Manager. Wanted to walk you through some of the changes and some of our thinking behind some of the changes that we've suggested. The first is the changes to Rule 205, which now includes the concept of a license to operate. We have historically considered the Form 1 the authorization to operate, and when we have revoked an operator's right to operate, it was through the revocation of the Form 1 and their financial assurance and what have you. So now that the statute has that concept of a license to operate, we felt that the Form 1 was the natural vehicle for that. We wanted that license to be annually renewed, and we thought the most efficient way to do that would be through the filing of the Form 1B. It's a existing form. It's required to be resubmitted annually, so it made sense to have that be the renewal of the license. We did include a new requirement, which was that when you file the Form 1B, we would ask that you include your certificate of good standing from the Secretary of State. For I'm sure everyone on this call, that's easy and could be pretty routine, but for some of the operators who are struggling, it's going to be a good early warning indicator for us that they are possibly having some compliance issues if they're not regularly filing their 1B and not attaching that certificate. So it is a new requirement, but I think it's pretty easy to comply with that. I am repeating what Lauren said about the annual marginal well fee, so I'll skip that. Um, 523, we just deleted some of the language that existed in that subsection. Uh, doesn't have any impact, but this is a concept that appears in all of our rules, unfortunately, where there's two different rules that have the same concept, and you end up having divergence between those two different locations. And so this was our attempt to have a clear reference to the one section that is now the guiding section. And so having that reference and deleting this language was not meant to have any substantive change. It's really just to make it clear that you really need to go look at 525D1 for the right concepts there. 525B5 is the adoption of the continuing violations doctrine that was written into the act. It is now a concept that is available to enforcement if they need it. It now appears in the rule so that it's clear. It's in the act, it's in the rule. I did want to mention there was a statutory change now. We now have a 3-year statute of limitations. That concept doesn't appear in these rules, but that was an important part of these statutory revisions. It never appeared in the rules. We didn't think it made sense to include it in the rules, but it does exist there. Next slide, please. So 525D, there's two new concepts. There's always been a list of mandatory OFV hearings if certain criteria were met. There are two new criteria that were given to us through changes to the act, and that is this third violation in a year having a major impact. That's a brand new one. A penalty of $1 million or more. Again, brand new criteria. The concept and other criteria have been in the rules. We're just adding these two new additional criteria. We wanted to make it clear in that same subsection, 525D, that if after a hearing, any of those criteria are proven, or the factual predicate for the criteria are proven, that not only could the commission or hearing officer revoke a permit or a certificate of clearance, but now that we have the concept of a license, it would make sense that that license could also be one of the sanctions. And so, again, most of that section predated these revisions. We're just including the new concept of the license as a possible sanction. Next slide, please. 527B, that's that same problem we've had before where there's the same concept in two different locations. And so we deleted that subparagraph there so that it was only in the correct location. And then we wanted to make it clear in 528 that the suspension of a license could be an additional sanction. Again, if the criteria are met and also after a hearing. And then the last, I think, is Lauren, if you don't mind. Yeah, so this was the cease and desist discussion in Rule 528. I highlighted in red the new concept. The rule was somewhat confusing, and so we've made an attempt to make it more clear by doing the bulleted list. You see a lot of red, but really there's not any new concepts there except for the new concept of significant adverse impact requiring immediate action. That is a new concept, but everything in that rule predated it. We just made some revisions and put it in the form of a list to hopefully make it a little bit easier for everyone to understand. But again, in red is the new concept. Everything else predated it. And as with license revocation, there's always an opportunity to appeal a cease and desist order to the commission. And I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. I will take back over for the final subject of our rules today, which is worker certification. This all happens in revised Rule 602. which applies. So, sort of a few framing points is first that this rule applies to all operations regulated by ECMC. So, that's energy and carbon management operations broadly, to include oil and gas, deep geothermal, class six, once we get primacy, and um, down the line, we'll see if there's anything else. We did receive some comments from folks advocating that this rule be limited to only oil and gas operations, but staff feels that because of similar operational characteristics at the different kinds of energy and carbon management operations, it makes sense to apply this to all operators. The rule uses the term workers to make it clear that we're talking not only about an operator's employees, but also an operator's contractors. Though, to be clear, responsibility for compliance with the rule falls to an operator. ECMC regulates operators, not individuals. So, certainly not looking to create any individual liability. It all rests with the operators to ensure that their workforce is in compliance. Um, so, um, as required by Senate Bill 19181, one component of the rule is a requirement that all operators employ or retain, using retain again to acknowledge that some operators will use contractors for this, a compliance officer. And compliance officer is a defined term that we're proposing to add in the 100 series. We did hear from a few folks some concerns that our use of the term compliance officer could raise confusion since OSHA also has a term compliance officer, which refers to the OSHA inspectors who go out and do compliance inspections. We used this term because it does come straight from Senate Bill 19181, and we felt that based on the context of our rules, it's obvious that we're talking about an employee or contractor of an operator, not an OSHA compliance professional. But if those concerns remain, we'd appreciate hearing them. We also, let's see. Then the really substantive part of the rule requires training and certification for specified workers at facilities. And one point that stakeholders raised in response to the straw dog is that our initial proposal went beyond the categories of workers for which certification was required in SB 181, which it was just compliance officers, welders working on flow lines, and those handling hazardous materials. In the straw dog, we proposed requiring certification for all workers at a facility regulated by the commission. We heard feedback that certifications aren't available for many workers, and that we could be creating a circumstance with no ability to comply. I think an example was painters who are out there. There's probably not a painting certification that they could have. That feedback made a lot of sense to us. And so we took a different approach in the notice draft that we look forward to getting your comments on. First, certifications are only required for workers at a facility working in potentially hazardous or critical environments, including or not, but not limited to workers handling hazardous materials and working with energized equipment. So our intention here is to ensure that those workers whose work is most likely to present risks to safety or the environment are properly certified. We know this is, not the clearest concept to articulate, so I would really welcome stakeholder feedback on how best to define this distinction and make sure that it's clear to everyone. And you'll note that this still goes beyond those three narrow categories specified by SB 181. And staff chose to present this option for consideration by stakeholders in the and the commissioners, with really sort of the guiding purpose of ensuring safety and proper training at locations, and particularly in light of health, safety, and environmental impacts caused by a recent well control incident in Weld County that I'd imagine we're all familiar with. That was part of the impetus to make sure that we're stressing that the folks where training and certification are most essential, that they have that. So we created so that's part one. Part two of this is that we created off-ramps to make it clear that certifications are only required where there's a certification available. So if you're in one of these potentially hazardous or critical functions, and there's, for example, an API certification out there, it's expected that that worker has that certification. Let's say there is no recognized certification available, but there are nationally recognized codes and standards. Then we require no certification because there isn't one, but that employee needs a working knowledge of the relevant codes and standards. Where there's neither a certification nor a nationally recognized code or standard, the rules just state that the worker has to have, the proper training to do their job at a professional level. So that is sort of the stair step approach of certifications where they're available, where they're not, but there's a standard. Please make sure that your employees are, able to operationalize that standard. And where that's not there, let's make sure there's good training. Um, Additionally, the rule has additional separate requirements for welders working on flow lines. This language comes straight from SB 181, which was very prescriptive about what qualifications those specific workers have to have. So that is pretty much a copy paste from the statute. Finally, we make it clear that operators must provide records to demonstrate compliance with this rule upon a request from staff. We've elected not to require proactive, like a form that shows your compliance with it, because workers change, move among operators, move into different positions all the time, and it would become any records that we sought on this would probably become stale almost immediately. So we determined the appropriate approach is to make sure that, operators are responsible for compliance with this all of the time. And upon request from a member of staff, they have to demonstrate that compliance. Sorry. Okay, so that is our overview of the rules, and we're going to close with next steps. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, July 11th is the deadline to seek party status. So that is the nearest term deliverable, so to speak. Then we will get a hearing officer order setting forth the briefing schedule, and the commission hearing will be on August 27th. Of course, parties may contact staff with questions or concerns throughout the rulemaking process. We will take some questions at the end here, but I expect that, questions might come up. We might not get to everything, and we are available to talk to folks if you want to reach out. My email address will be on the last slide, and I would suggest that you start with me, and I will get you to the right member of our team. Now we are in the questions section, and I would ask that you focus your questions on clarifying the information we just shared and or the process. This, I would say, is not the forum for advocacy or for lobbying for your position on the rules. There will be plenty of time for that in the briefing. And like I said, we're also always available for follow-up meetings. So I'll take down the screen share, and I guess please just raise your hand, and maybe Hearing Officer Berman can help us get folks into the queue.
Yeah, so chat has been enabled. So if any of the participants have a question, they can just type it into the chat.
I think we'd be okay taking verbal questions as well, if that's possible. Hearing Officer Berman, could you please elevate Julia Ryan? I see her hand up. Good afternoon,
Hi
Julia.
there. Good afternoon. Thank you all very much for the presentation. Julia Ryan with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck on behalf of the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I have just two process requests. So there are only about 6.5 weeks between when requests for party status are due this Friday and the hearing on the 27th. And so given that condensed timeline, would it be possible for hearing officer Berman to provide an estimate of when he expects the case management order to issue? We would just love to see it as soon as possible so we can prepare a briefing. That's point one. And then point two, also related to the CMO, while we're thinking about that, certainly this rulemaking is narrow relative to some of the more expansive ones that ECMC has held recently, such as cumulative impacts. But the proposed rules are still quite impactful and have generated a lot of interest from KOGA's members. Our straw dog comments were 8 pages single spaced. So our request would be that parties are allowed at least 15 pages double spaced for pre-hearing statements. And I'm authorized to state that API joins in that request as well. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Julia. Matt, not to put you on the spot, but are you able to give a best guess at when that pre-hearing order should come out?
I'm going to try to get it out July 14th, which is a week from today.
Thank you very much. And we'll certainly take into account that request for the length of the pre-hearing statements. I'm candidly not sure what our standard is or what we've done in the past, but it sounds reasonable to me. So thank you, Julia. Was there anything else?
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And I see a comment from somebody unable to access the worker certification. And the question, will worker certification for all welding operations done at oil and gas locations and trenching certifications be required? And that I couldn't open the straw dog, so I'm sorry that for the technical issues. I dropped a link in the chat that should go to the noticed rules. And I can also, so on page 13 of the noticed rules, it has, well, the second to last item on the whole document has the requirement for welders working on flow lines. So that's knowledge of ECMC's flow line rules, a minimum of 7,000 hours of on-the-job training or supervision by someone with that much training, and passage of the International Code Council exam F31 or analogous. And again, those come straight out of SB 181. Um, and will OSHA has Whopper training documentation be required? Um, I don't know. We don't have a specific requirement related to that. Um, and yes, you're definitely correct that a lot more welding is done on locations. The SB 181 requirements of the three specific things I just read off are only for welders working on flow lines. Welders doing other work would be expected to follow the rule that applies to sort of all workers doing hazardous or critical work, which is if there is a nationally recognized certification, they need to have it. And we certainly recognize or welcome sort of specific conversations to follow up on this. And as to um, will API 54 for work over rig training be required? Um, I think some of these specific questions we should have a follow-up conversation about. It's really we're trying to frame the rules in a way that we explain, you know, if there is a certification, get it. If there is a code, follow it. But we're trying to avoid listing out every single like possible API code or ASME or one of the other standards, just because there are so many, they're going to change frequently. And we don't want to sort of inadvertently narrow the universe of what's required. So we definitely would welcome your input on how we can make sure that we're at the right level of detail in terms of making it clear enough that folks have the knowledge they need to comply without sort of going too far in, listing out every single thing. Do we have any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any. I really appreciate everyone's time being here today, and we look forward to engaging with you further throughout this rulemaking process. So thank you and have a great afternoon.